Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, your host or hostess, or I can never decide what to call myself. Well, here we are. It's a few days after the national election 2004, in case you're reading this, seeing this on reruns. But it's not a rerun for us. We've been here, well, maybe it is a rerun. We've been here before. So I have three really smart people joining me today to talk about this election and its impact, if any, on the gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, and questioning community. And maybe in a broader sense, its impact on every community, and anything else they want to talk about. My guests today, in order that I'm going to talk to them, Phill Wilson, who's an AIDS activist, head of a number of organizations, and now a columnist in over 300 black newspapers in the United States. Welcome, Phill.
I'm glad to be here.
It's really good to see you again. I'm glad you could join us. And Curt Shepard, who is the Governmental Relations Director at the LA Gay and Lesbian Center. I think also community relations and lots of things that go into the title. Happy to have you on the show.
Thanks, Sheila.
And our long-standing friend, I can't say old friend because you'll never be as old as I am, Torie Osborn, who has been an activist even back before the other anti-war movement, just assuming there's going to be another one, and activist for women's issues, for gay and lesbian issues, and really all the progressive issues we've ever heard of. Torie, welcome.
Glad to be here.
So, Phill, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
We had an election. It didn't go the way.
Everybody came.
And everybody came. What if they threw an election and everybody came? Well, now we know the answer, don't we? Everybody's looking for a message in this election, or, you know, the positive message, the negative message. And since this show is really about, really, to some extent, the gay and lesbian community, tell me what you think. The impact on the community, the impact of our community on the election, anything you want to talk about.
Well, you know, I'm of two minds. You know, I kind of go with, you know, the tales of two cities. You know, it was the best of times and the worst of times. Now, on the upside, and maybe we should start there. Maybe we should start with the downside and an upside. I don't know. But on the upside, you know, I spent, you know, a few days in Pennsylvania doing Get Out the Vote and canvassing and telephoning, and it was really one of the most remarkable experiences of my life, you know, to see people engaged in our democracy, to see young people who are fired up and committed to this democratic process. And it was extremely rewarding and extremely inspiring. And I'm hopeful that Americans, you know, will grab a hold of our democracy and fight for it. I have been fearful over the last 4 years that to really stand up for our democratic process, to criticize our government, to kind of talk about debate and political debate. Now, there's been this turn where to actually provide any sort of critical thinking was perceived to be anti-American, or anti-patriotic. And quite frankly, I think, to critique our government is the most patriotic activity that we can engage in. And I feel that many of those young people and many of the folks who are involved in getting out the vote and working on this election feel the same. And so that was the good news. On the downside, you know, I'm not happy with the outcome of the election. I think that we all need to kind of review and analyze and look at what happened. Now, I'm concerned that a majority of Americans who voted feel that it is okay to discriminate against folks. Now, I think that there's certainly a loss for gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender folks, but quite frankly, I think it was a loss for Americans. Now, I think that it was a loss for poor people. I think it was a loss for seniors, and I think we're going to see that in the upcoming, maybe in the coming weeks, quite frankly. I think it was a loss for people with disabilities. It's certainly a loss for people with AIDS. And actually, and this is going to shock people, I think it was a loss for people of faith, because the separation of church and state protects both the church and the state. Now, and when those lines get blurred, we are all in peril. And I think that we should be concerned that there are public policies decisions being made based on religious doctrine. And I think that that is troubling, and particularly when those religious doctrines, or at least the way they're articulated, say that it is okay that there are Americans that are more deserving of equal rights and there are Americans who are not so deserving of equal rights.
Well, it's interesting when you say that about people of faith, because that's a very large group that can really encompass anyone who has any sort of spiritual belief or religion, whether they practice it or not. But the people who seem to be claiming that title, people who seem to be showing up at the polls under that flag, under that rubric, seem to be much more sort of the conservative, we would say right-wing Christians, who were brought to the polls apparently partly energized by wanting to keep our community from making any gains.
Well, I think that it's important for those of us of faith who are in that bigger tent, and the tent is bigger than just, the religious right, need to claim our faith. We need to take ownership of our faith, and we need to say, to desire to marginalize others is not the only voice of the faithful. That there are those of us of faith who want to embrace each other, that want a society that is inclusive, that wants a society that really celebrates our diversity and our humanity and our ability for each American citizens to contribute. I think that that is really an important message for gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered folks of the left and progressive folks, to say that I don't abandon my faith because I believe in equality. I don't abandon my faith because I believe that a woman should have the right to choose. I don't abandon my faith because I think we need to care for our seniors. I don't abandon my faith because I believe that our health care safety net should be maintained. I don't abandon my faith because I think that we should have comprehensive sex education, and we should have comprehensive education around HIV and AIDS. In fact, all of those things are about my faith, and as a black gay man of faith, what my Bible tells me is that there is value in truth and honesty and integrity. And I celebrate my faith when I tell the truth about who I am, and I stand up for who I am. That is the message that I get from my God, and I think that's the message that we need to spread in our communities.
Well, I think one of the shocking things about the way sort of the notion of religion or faith has been hijacked is it reminds me very much of the early part of the 60s when, remember, people were talking about love as though it were a word that had been taken out of the English language and needed to be brought back in. The love children. And it was reoccurring to me this time because everything you've been talking about, and indeed our community itself, has always been about love. What is it that makes a person gay? It's because of who they love. And so that divide between what kind of a person am I that wants to care for other people, that wants to worry about those that have less than I do, that doesn't think that war is the answer, why isn't that a community of faith that has come together to vote as a community of faith? But they've been doing the organizing, and they've been doing it around hatred, or at least around negativity.
Well, and that, quite frankly, is the message of this election. I mean, we can paint in all sorts of ways, but the truth of the matter is that electoral politics is a game with specific rules, and the right came to this particular game determined to win. And they used the tools of the game to make it so. They organized better than we organized. They were clear about what they were fighting for in a way that we were not able to be as clear. And I think that the left, if we kind of use the paradigm of right and left, I think that the left was not as well organized and not as clear and not as focused. The right perceived that they were fighting for something, and sadly, I think, for many folks on the left, we were fighting against something. And I think that we found ourselves in that place and we stayed there, when in truth, we have lots of things that we can fight for. And there are lots of things to fight for that were on the line in this particular election.
Well, but couldn't it also be said that the right was fighting against something, and that something was us?
Us.
I mean, it was characterized that way, and indeed I've even heard some prominent Democrats starting to blame our community as though we invented those 11 state initiatives to ban our, marriages, when, I mean, it seemed like a very good organizing tool, but why blame it on a community? What, we brought it up? It's sort of like people said to me in the old days, you know, there wouldn't be all this discrimination if black people didn't talk about it so much.
Exactly.
Just foolishness.
Exactly.
But I think it's very dangerous for people to start talking about blaming our community for this loss. And frankly, I think completely wrong.
I agree with you that it is completely wrong. You know, like I said, I was in Pennsylvania. I wasn't in Pennsylvania, didn't have an initiative on the ballot. But quite frankly, I don't think that this is at the top of the agenda for the folks that were voting in Pennsylvania, and it certainly was not on the top of the agenda for most of the folks that I've spoken to around the country. And I think that we need to look at that, and certainly I think that if the Democratic Party is going to blame the same-sex marriage issue on this loss, then the Democratic Party is bankrupt in that regard. You know, because that's just not true. And even if it were true, so what? You know, I think that at certain points in our lives, and if we're lucky, it can be more of our lives than less of our lives, you have to have integrity about something. Now, and we should stand for equality. We should stand for fairness, and this is an issue around equality or fairness. Whether or not you believe it should be at the top of the agenda or the bottom of the agenda or whatever, and we've had that discussion too, but at the core of this, fighting for equality, fighting for equal rights on the question of marriage or equal rights on any question, is standing up for our democracy. And regardless of whether or not you live in a red state or a blue state, we should all be standing up for our democracy. And for me, that means that each and every American has equal rights. Now, it's as simple as that. There's no such thing as more rights or less rights, It just doesn't fly that way. And quite frankly, I think that Senator Kerry and the ticket, was in trouble on two fronts. Now, once they took the stand that they did not support same-sex marriages, they were saying, we don't support equal rights. I think that put them in a flawed position. And secondly, to then say, that they would have supported the war, even if they knew then what they know now. Well, the war is wrong. We have young people who are dying, who are in harm's way in a war that was based on false information, if not false promises. Now, we're losing that war. We lost more people in 1 year than we lost, I think, in 5 or 6 years in Vietnam. And there's no end in sight. Now, regardless of what the polls said, the position of integrity is the war is wrong, and I believe in equality for all Americans, flat and simple. And you live and die on that. And then you can build a movement on that.
I agree. Well, Curt, you're the one among the four of us actually working at a gay and lesbian organization that's devoted to gaining equal rights as well as providing services at the center. How do you see this question in terms of the impact of the election on our community, but also this question about the impact our community may or may not have had on the election, for better or for worse?
Right. Well, I just want to thank you for having me follow the preacher. It's really nice of you to have me do that. It's
always a good spot. Well, Torie told me, no, absolutely not. I'm not going after Phill.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. I'm the newbie here, so I'm the one who gets to do it.
So you get to do it, but that's all right. You're smart enough.
Well,
Go ahead.
I've been really concerned. I've been wallowing in my own depression and sharing the depression and frustration and anger with a lot of my colleagues, my professional colleagues, and my my friends and neighbors. And I'm just trying to put one foot in front of the other one and try to move on from this and try to figure out how to do this. I mean, there are a couple things that occur to me that I think are salient issues, and I think what Phill was saying is I disagree that we, the gays, were not the issue that cost Kerry the election. And I mean, Kerry came out against gay and lesbian marriage, and the numbers just don't support that. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the numbers really don't support that was really what happened. And I think to frame the whole values discussion, which is what some people are doing, and pinning that on the gay and lesbian marriage issue is completely erroneous and not valid. And the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about is this whole notion of values and how we have ceded the whole values discussion to the other side, and that I think it's important to assert and figure out a way to assert that we are people of value, we are people that have faith and commitments and have commitments and care about society, and that and I think that we can and need to, and these are some of the discussions that I've been having with people, we need to figure out how to do that and reclaim that and own that without necessarily moving to the right, again, putting it in the right-left paradigm. And I think that I have to believe there's a way to do that, and that we don't have to become Republicans, again, putting it in that paradigm, in order to reclaim those values and own those. Another thing that I've been thinking about in terms of all this is the whole, I guess I call it narrow casting. And I think that I had an experience during the campaign of doing some programming at the LA Gay and Lesbian Center based on the films of the documentaries of Robert Greenwald, the Unfilms and Outfoxed. And because it was important to me and important to the center to have the center become a place where political discussions writ large happen, and to demonstrate to the community, our community and the broader community, that that LGBT people care about the bigger issues such as the war, such as the economy, and other things, not just sort of our narrow sort of parochial issues. And it was amazing the response we got. In 4 evenings of programming, hundreds of people coming to the center to see these films and then have discussions afterwards. Not one person asked the gay corollary to the old, but is it good for the Jews? Nobody asked that kind of question. They were all deeply concerned about these broader issues that those films raised. So I thought that's been something I've been thinking about, and how to sort of participate as a community in these broader issues, such as the war in Iraq and such as, you know, other social issues. And then finally, I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but among the things that who knows, and among the things that I've been thinking about is the fact that and one of the things that breaks my heart is that all of the anti-gay rhetoric of this campaign, and that has been occurring in the media and reinforced by the media, the results of all of that mean that people land on our doorstep seeking services. And so that, for instance, when Senator Kerry went to Missouri and said he supported the Missouri decision to constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage, that has a direct result in that the kids who live in Missouri and who hear those kinds of views being sanctioned and supported by our political leaders, those are the kids who end up on our doorstep seeking services. And so those are the things that I've been thinking about, I guess, in terms of this discussion. And in my capacity.
Listen, you've summed up a lot of things. I mean, I have seen so many people in the last several days, you know, in tears. They don't want to be in tears. They would rather be angry. I've been very lucky. I've been very angry and not in tears yet. But you've raised a lot of good points. I was thinking when you were talking about your point about values, how many times the Democratic Party has not articulated its own values, but said, and frankly our community too, well, us too. You know, this kind of whiny little tone like, well, we've got families too. Okay, of course we've got families too, and we need to talk about it, and we have talked about it, and we've had, you know, photo shoot campaigns about it, but the party itself has not been clear.
Right.
That these are our values, that these are values they've stolen, corrupted, and misrepresented in terms of what it is.
Yes, some of the things that I've been reading.
Talk about narrow casting.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the things that I've been, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No,
Some of the things that I've been reading have to do with how well the left sort of articulates issues, but has not been very good about these values issues. And somebody, I think Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times the other day said the 4 Gs. I've heard it the 3 Gs, but it's the 4 Gs. You know, guns, gays, grizzlies, and God. And those are the things that clearly matter to a vast majority. And I don't want to frame it in terms of blue-red, because that cuts a bunch of different ways, but those are the things that resonate with the people that defeated Senator Kerry.
Well, and I guess the other thing about in terms of values and kind of incorporating this notion that Phill was talking about equality and being much more straightforward about it. I guess when Howard Dean, was characterized as screaming, and everybody said, well, it's over because, he just went over beyond the pale. I have always believed that you take your chances by saying what you really believe and saying it strongly. Mm-hmm. Now, it works okay for me in my district because I've got a wonderful district that, elects me over anybody 2-to-1. But I can see where a national figure would worry. I mean, I would even worry running statewide. What am I got to say to, my more conservative counties? But gay people themselves, I don't know if they all voted for John Kerry.
They didn't, and 20% of gay people voted for Bush. Also, I was surprised to hear a statistic this morning about how many gay people in the exit polling identified as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, who also define themselves as evangelical Christians. I was surprised. Phill and I were in a meeting this morning, or we both heard that, and I was surprised about that. It also is true that, and it was true in the 90s, people talked about this all the time in the 90s, that the largest organized gay, organization of gay people is the MCC Church, mm-hmm. that it vastly outstrips in numbers all of our other gay political organizations put together, and I don't know if that's still true, but I would guess that it probably is.
Well, Torie, you and I have had a conversation about this notion about whether you can have a fundamentalist country, because that's what it takes to fight a fundamentalist country in a war, or fundamentalist organization. What do you think, though? You don't have to talk about the religion thing, but what do you think about the impact of this election on our community and our community's impact on the election?
Well, I'm in a place where I'm looking for what's unusual, where the contradictions are, where the openings might be. I mean, I've been saying this for a while, but I think the world changed on 9/11, and I think not very many of our kind of traditional political or advocacy organizations or political communities have caught up with that reality yet. And so I, for example, am buoyed by the fact that 60% of the people of Ohio believe in civil unions and domestic partnership. I choose to be positive about that statistic rather than that 60% of them voted for that awful ban on gay marriage. That is where the country is now. Now, I remind people that 8 years ago, or 10 years ago, when I did the research on my book, only 43% of Americans supported domestic partnerships. Civil unions wasn't even in the discourse. It does not mean that I'm not proud, that I don't think that Senator Feinstein is just plain wrong, fearful, turning to the right, and wrong when she blames Gavin Newsom and the gay community for too much, too fast, too soon in the gay marriage. Lydia and I went up to be part of history and get married. I am thrilled we did it. You married us yourself. It was a beautiful and transformative experience for anybody whose lives were touched by those ripples of joy that went out from the television set, not for our marriage, but that moment in history moved the debate forward. However, I do think that at some point we have to move beyond our own, what Curt was saying, we have to move beyond our own issues. And for me, with all due respect to my own marriage and that marriage certificate that is up on my wall in a place of honor and will always be, even if it was annulled 5 months and 4 days later, marriage equality is not as important to me as ending the war. right now. And you know, I've had these times in my life before. I came out when I was 22, but I didn't start doing lesbian feminist work until the war in Vietnam ended. You know, we are at different places in different times in our life, and this is actually what I really hope. For me, the discussion is about a world that is dramatically transforming, globalization, 10,000 species, globalization destroying indigenous economies, civil wars all over the world, corporate hegemony of corporate capitalism with no alternative economic system to even have a debate about, to even have a Cold War about, terrorism, which is a tactic, guys. It's not a country. It's not an economic system. It's a tactic. And I will tell you, you know, right here on television, there is no difference between Islamic fundamentalism and Christian fundamentalism in terms of its relationship to democracy, to justice, to a different world that we all know is possible. And so, for me, what changed on 9/11 and what I hope begins to change in this country is a conversation, and I mean including in the left and in the GLBT community, where we crack it open, where we be deeply and humanely about the things we say we're about, where we are really about democracy, where we tolerate not just, you know, diversity in some, I don't know, some sort of token way, but we really let our friends who are Christians, who are evangelicals, you know, come out of the closet about that. How many, if I hear it once, I've heard it like 10 times in the last few years. My friends will say, well, I'm a person of faith, but I feel like I can't say that in liberal or left circles. Okay, so I think we're in a rapidly changing, deeply insecure, terrifying world where there's nuclear, you know, where there's war and there's, you know, nuclear capability, and terrorism. Terrorists are a real threat to this country and to other countries where they've been more of a threat for much longer. But the answer is not fundamentalism. It's a law of physics. You do not fight fire with fire. Osama's saying, bring them on, bring Bush on, right? Every single day that we talk saber rattle about Iran and North Korea and send more people into Iraq, we're creating more terrorists, not less. I think somewhere, some part of American people know that. But John Kerry never said that. By him being a Republican light on the war issue, as well. Okay, and then the other thing is just what Curt said. You cannot fight a moral vision with great plans. I don't care how many of them you have. Many plans do not add up to an alternative moral vision. In a world like this one, with so much demographic shift, with so much economic dislocation, environmental destruction, you know, who can even keep up with your own email, let alone the rapid rate of change around the world and the losses and the insecurities? I mean, you know, we are in a time in history we've never seen before. I mean, there's been dislocations before. There's been radical times of change. But we are in one where we have the potential, for the first time in human history, actually, for economic justice. Where post-scarcity would only take 4% of the net worth of the 225 richest people in the world for everybody to have food, clothing, shelter, reproductive health care, education, basic needs to be met. Okay, this has never happened before. This is new in the last 50 years. So you have a whole new world that's possible. And at the same time, you have this terrifying ideologies that are really worse than communism, this kind of fundamentalism. But theirs is no worse than ours. And what I really hope happens, I mean, I'm in my, like, angry, you know, I want to write a manifesto about this. I mean, and I mean, not just to queers, you know, not just to gay people. I want gay people to be just as angry at the prospect of Arctic drilling and just as angry at this war. And you know what I want to say? I think we are. I think the turnout, you know, the turnout at Curt's film series by Robert Greenwald, and everything that I'm hearing is that it's like our structures, our discourse, our organizations are from the old world, but the new world is one where we really do come together. And what Phil's experience had in Philadelphia, I was in New Mexico, Lydia and I, and a motley crew of gay and straight people that just came together because of a moment in history and being willing to go to New Mexico, and we walked with Acorn in trailer parks, and we walked with America Coming Together, and we walked with the Carry campaign, and we walked at 4 in the morning, we walked at midnight, and I could sit here for hours and tell you stories that give me hope. And I also learned some lessons. I learned that Latina Democrats voted for Bush because of abortion. Now, I can sit there and I can say, oh my God, you know, or I can say, okay, and I want to figure out how we get those women to vote for, not for Bush next time around. We got to do it differently, and we can't, and so in my view, if Carrie had lifted up a moral vision of the world that could compete, took some risks, was bold, was creative, was innovative, you know, why was he not talking about the environment? Why was he not talking about, you know, a radically new vision of the world? There are so many things that could have competed for the hearts and the minds and the guts, because the chink in the army of the Christian Evangelicals is Jesus spent a whole lot more time talking about poverty and talking about what was wrong with rich people than he did talk about gays and guns and abortion. And as soon as we create, we got to get over ourselves. I mean, there's a lot of things we need to let go.
Still, though, the organizing tool, and
I
this
mean
is
we
to,
gays, I mean we, all of us need to let go.
I understand, and I, you know, very articulate and 30 wonderful points that I would, that I want us to talk about for the rest of the show and everything else we want to talk about. One of the questions, though, is supposing you do articulate a strong vision, can it overcome that sort of the fear and hatred vision? Because it seems to me
the only thing that overcomes fear is faith.
You have to believe it will.
The only thing that overcomes fear is faith and love. They are the only things that overcome fear.
And the arbiter of it can't be a single election. You know, we have to believe what we believe, and that, quite frankly, is one of the distinctions that I see. And I agree with Corey. I mean, we were at a meeting.
Torie.
I mean, Torie.
His son's name is Corey. He gets us mixed up all the time.
Actually, he's on my brain because he's actually in Houston. I agree with Torie, and we were at a number of us were at a meeting this morning talking about what should the gay and lesbian community do, and I put on the table, and not as strongly as I'm going to say it this afternoon, is that I know what I'm going to do, you know, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to work in black communities, now, as an openly gay man. Now, and I've had the privilege of doing that for the last 4 years. And for the record, you know, black folks voted 90% for Carrie, as opposed to what gay folks did. You know? So go figure. But at the same time, when, you know, the religious right was trying to use this as an issue, as a wedge issue for black voters. But I think when we talk about moving forward, you know, as I do the work that I do on poverty issues, on justice issues, on race relations issues, on health issues, taking with me who I am in all of it, you know, that moves, you know, the issues around equality based on sexual orientation usually forward. You know, and I am concerned about the war. You know, I mean, I was heartbroken because of the war, right. You know, and those issues. I was heartbroken because I know that Social Security is going to go in the toilet, you know, if we privatize it in the way that this president is talking about privatizing. I know it. I'm upset because there are men and women who are getting infected with HIV every day because we have a public policy that is an Alice in Wonderland theory of public policy, where we wish what is isn't and what isn't is. You know, and when you talk about abstinence only as the only language that you can talk about HIV prevention, that destines young people to become HIV positive.
You know, one of the things, I want to make 2 points. One is that I believe that things happen for a reason. I don't know why. I wasn't as surprised at the outcome of this. I mean, I got my hopes up on Election Day. But I really believe that the GLBT community, because of how our politics, our activism, and our experience has been molded by having to fight the right for the last 20 years. We have been at their crosshairs. And that we actually have the experience of knowing that they are not conservatives, they're radicals, and knowing that they are not American, they are anti-American, and knowing that they are not democratic. We know this. We can teach. We can talk about this. We can share our experience. How did we expose them? How did we move the country forward 20, 30, 40 points on gay rights in the most conservative era in American history? We have a lot that we can bring from that experience. You know, the emperor is butt naked and what did it say? Somebody said buck naked and butt ugly. And we know this, and we have our own experience. And our own ways that we can bring our own experience of having fought on HIV policy, on, you know, gay and lesbian rights, to a broader movement that needs to, people have not quite yet got it. The $280 million of prevention money that used to come to creative programs to prevent HIV are now going to build the infrastructure of wacko evangelical Christians who have abstinence-only programs, so that stupid little groups that had one staff person now have 25, 30 staff. They're building the infrastructure of their right-wing movement.
Well, it's happening all across the National Institutes for Health. It's happening all across in terms of research as well.
Let me just say one other thing. This real story of this election, if people, after they mourn, after they rage, start getting organized again, is to recognize how much has happened in the last year. How much of an infrastructure, America coming together within the Democratic Party, is building sort of the left wing of the Democratic Party from the ground up. The labor movement, environmental and women's movements coming together. They're not going away. They're not folding a tent. They're moving to the future. Gay people have to be in there. Where I was in New Mexico, the head of the field operation for the state of New Mexico was Sue Burnside, who's a longtime lesbian, you know, Democratic Party activist, and she said to me proudly, she said, all of my deputies are gays and lesbians. We know from field organizing. All right, so we lost, you know.
Top to bottom, full chock-a-block with LGBT people.
And the 501c3 organizing, to get out the voter registration, the you know, National Voice and America Vote, and all of these groups that were doing the C3 organizing of youth, of, you know, in different communities. We got the New Vote, we got the Youth Vote. This is the beginnings, and all the Move On, and the League of Pissed Off Voters, and, you know, all of these groups, the thousands of groups. This is the beginning of the next phase of activism, and I feel like we all need to be like, you know, Larry Kramer at the early part of the AIDS epidemic, and be calling for a higher level of resistance. If we have to go in the streets, it may be time to go in the streets.
Do you think it's going to happen, Torie? Because all of these people that you're talking about and this wellspring of experience has sort of been sitting there. Do you think this is, I mean, is this going to catalyze them, you think, in some sustained way?
I think if people put out the call, and if the moment is right, and if people, I mean, I can just see, I don't know what it'll look like, you know, I mean, I don't think I'm going to be, you know, the leader of this movement, but I do think it has to not just be, you know, gay people on gay marriage and enviros on Arctic drilling. It's time to say, okay, NRDC, I think you're too white. I don't think you're perfect, but you know what? If you put out the call, I will put my body on the line on Arctic drilling, because I was in Alaska this year, and it breaks my heart, the idea that those old growth forests would be killed for profit to make the 1/2 of 1% of the rich even wealthier. It is immoral. You talk about immoral, it's immoral. And I want to say to my environmental friends, are you going to be there with us? And maybe it's not going to be gay marriage. Maybe it's going to be civil unions. I don't know. But we need to start talking across movements and daring to dream of rebuilding the next great left in this country.
But that means that one of the messages, I mean, that I hear from you, and I think it's a question that has to be answered on this show. There are people who are so depressed, so feel like they were punched in the stomach, that the lesson that they could be learning, or that they may feel they're learning, is what's the use? What's the use? You know, we did all this work and it didn't work. I mean, I think they forget how many millions of people voted the way they wanted them to vote. And they don't know how many more may have done it because of their work.
But if they were on those phone banks, or if they went to those meetups,
but what if
they had an experience.
What if their feeling is,
I don't think it's going to last. I don't think it's going to last. I think we put out a call Phill was part of putting out the call to, and I was heartened by that, by how many people showed up for this sort of strategy session this morning, how many people want to roll up their sleeves. I mean, I prefer to believe that it's real and that it wasn't just sort of someplace to show up. I really believe people are ready to roll up their sleeves.
There's no other people on the planet who know better than we know that it's not over till it's over. You know,
and how to mourn and then move on.
Right.
Exactly.
And you know, I was one of those people where the doctors made the call, you know, come now because he's not going to last another 24 hours. You know, I've been at those deathbeds. You know, I talk to people today who are alive who we didn't know were going to make it the next hour. You know, so yeah, maybe we got punched in the stomach, but we've been beat up a lot worse, and we've come back. You know, and so the thing that I would say to those folks who feel like what the use, you know, is we've been there before, you know, and we have proven that there is not only a reason to fight, you know, but there are benefits to fighting. There are rewards to fighting. There are positive outcomes that come about, you know, because we have been able to fight even when we were at our weakest moments. I am alive today, and many of us are alive today because, you know, at many times we decided, given the choice between giving up and not giving up, we chose not to.
We also know another thing we learned is the therapeutic power of activism. And I mean, how many of our friends found, I'm serious, you know, found that the antidote to depression and the antidote to fear is action and, in fact, activism and movement building and working together and building a new movement. That's what we did around AIDS, and I really think the time has come to rebuild, to have the next great American movement, a new American movement.
Well, and also you remember in your, in your book and in a number of books, people talking about the importance of coming out, of being present, of letting everybody in the world know, you know, I'm one of them, deal with it.
But there isn't one right, true way to do it, and this is what I mean. We must look at the fundamentalism within. Just, if I choose to not work on behalf tomorrow for, you know, for one issue, whether it's on the assimilationist side or for, you know, whatever, we have to respect that people, that there's so much work that needs to be done, and the vision is so broad that if you want to work on transgender issues, go for it. If you want to work in implementing AB 537 with Gay Straight Alliance Network in the schools in California, that now 40% of which have GSA chapters, go for it. But if you want to work on the war, go for it.
But let people know. That's all I'm saying.
That's exactly
Phill says
right.
he goes to the black community and he's a gay man in the black community. I mean, it's amazing, the turnaround in the black community. There was enormous homophobia. We won a cable award for a show we did about that very issue several years ago. And it has been, at least as demonstrated in this election, a bit of a turnaround. And I think that you're absolutely right about the work.
And it's to the degree that it's happened or is happening, and I think it happens across movement, it happens because we don't see who we are. You know, my dad said, and I love him dearly, he called me up one day and he was talking about, you know, now I'm not going to remember, the Protection of Marriage Act. And he says, you know, George Bush seems to think that my marriage needs to be protected. I didn't know that. And he said, you know, if you and Mark got married tomorrow, I don't think that I'm going to divorce your mother and marry my dispatcher. I don't see how your getting married has anything to do with my marriage. And he says, and you know something? If I get my marriage right, I consider myself lucky. I don't have time to worry about whether or not you get yours right. And I actually think the reverse of that is also true. And that is my humanity, my equality is intrinsically connected, you know, to your humanity and your equality. If they are able to marginalize me, then they're able to marginalize you no matter who you are. You know, so part of our message has to be that you have to stand with me for your own protection. You know, because those who would marginalize us, you know, are not going to stop with just one group. And quite frankly, in all of this, you know, the person that frightens me the most, you know, are the types of things that Dianne Feinstein is saying. Because if you look at the history of fascism, every place where fascism has happened, it's happened in a context of fear and baiting and blaming. You know, and that those are the environments in which fascism, you know, is likely to survive. You know, Benjamin Franklin said those who will sacrifice liberty for safety deserve neither liberty or safety. And so the interest of our safety, no, we have to fight for our liberty.
Curt, I think I interrupted you as well, or maybe we all interrupted.
No, I was just going to say something. There is something powerful. If one of one's aims is to strengthen the LGBT community and whatever that looks like, there's something very powerful about not focusing on that, but focusing on some other issue, whether it's the environment, whether it's, you know, something else. And I think that's an incredibly powerful way to strengthen our community as well, you know, by not focusing on it necessarily in this sort of navel-gazing, narrow-casting kind of way, but being present and accounted for and vocal in these other movements and these other communities.
Well, it always feels to me like there's some sort of search program going on in the right wing for the next scapegoat. You know, is it going to be the unions? Is it going to be gay people? Is it going to be abortion? It really doesn't matter. I don't think George Bush cares about any of those issues. I mean, honestly, personally, is just upset about any of them.
Exploit it. You know, they brilliantly exploit it. And the bottom line of it is that we had these 11 ballot initiatives. They all won, even in Oregon, where a good campaign was fought against it, because that's where people are. And you know, they were able to exploit it. But at his press conference this week, you didn't see George Bush resurrecting the idea of the federal marriage amendment, because what if they actually got a federal marriage amendment? They couldn't exploit that issue to bring people out to the polls in order to then actually move a regressive and repressive economic agenda forward. I mean, the irony of this whole thing is that you get all these people all whooped up about gay rights and abortion. At least for now, abortion is still with us. Gay rights are happily moving along. They're galloping along, as best as I can tell. We have more rights, more visibility, more power, more you know, we are a part of the American family now more than we ever have been. But the people who have voted against us consistently have less economic security. Their kids can't afford to go to college. It's all a big old red herring. It's all a bunch of BS. You worry about those glibets and their marriage, and the fact is we're just going to take away all your economic security and all your rights. And until people start, I mean, this is why we have to be part of a broader movement that connects with the heartland of this country, including the white heartland of this country. Although let us notice how people of color and gays and Jews did not vote for this man. The heart of his was 88%, you know, white, not just religious, but white people. I mean, the future is with a different vision, I think. But I mean, you know, the bottom line of it is that that this is kind of a distraction for the real issue, which is this consolidation of power by extremists who are in so many ways anti-American, certainly against the best vision of this country.
Well, when the first thing he talks about is Social Security privatization, and then, did you read the third sentence in that statement about Social Security? Said, well, of course there will be some loss in benefits for those that go into the private investments.
Right.
Well, then why would anyone do it? Well, we're going to make you do it after a few years, and then there'll be a loss in benefits, not, you know, not for people making money, just for you.
They want to fatten the corporations' coffers and wealthy people's coffers at the expense of middle class and working class people, and middle class people so far are buying it. And it is about time that we start looking in the eye of the American people and not just saying, you know, give me my rights, but saying you and I have something in common. They are taking our country from us, and it is time to take it back.
And quite frankly, we have an opportunity, because the way the history of social movement in this country has happened, whether we're talking about the issues of race or whether we're talking about the woman's right to vote, you know, once the genie is out the bottle, it's out the bottle, you know. So quite frankly, no, gay marriage is going to happen.
Right.
You know, it's going to happen. It may not happen this year. It may not happen next year. It may not happen for 5 or 10 years, but it's going to happen. You know, and they know that. You know, and so they know that it's easy to kind of fight this fight, because they know that it's a fight that will continue to generate money, you know, because it's going to happen. And while folks are focusing on us, as Torie just said, really, while folks are focusing on this issue, all these other issues that impact their lives, they're not focusing on. A lot of the folks who voted for George Bush, you know, this time, possibly on the issue of conservative moral values that includes us and a whole bunch of other things, are folks that voted against their interests. You know, and it was important for them to make a case to folks to vote against your interests, because if folks began to look at the economic situation that we're in, the impact of the deficit, you know, that we're involved in, you know, if they look at what's happening to our healthcare delivery system, and that when you start shutting down emergency rooms like we're doing in California because people don't want to pay an extra 2 cents on their telephone bill, you know, it doesn't just impact the poor people. No, it doesn't just impact people of AIDS. It means that when you're in a car accident, it doesn't matter if you're driving a Mercedes or a Lexus, no, or a pickup truck, you know, you won't be able to go to the emergency room. Now, and so folks, you know, it's one of those switch and bait and switch types of things. Now, as long as they can keep people distracted, they get people voting their way. And it's our job to say, okay, we're actually in this together. You know, and so let's talk about the fact that I'm interested in the economy, you know, as a gay man or as a lesbian. I'm interested in the deficit as a gay man or a lesbian. And Curt, not to the exclusion. I actually don't think all of us should do that. So I think that we have great capacity. So it doesn't even have to be that we need to focus on these larger issues instead of gay and lesbian issues. No. We can focus on these larger issues in addition to some of us focusing on gay and lesbian issues.
But the country has been so led to believe that everything is someone else's fault. If you tell someone, you know, the emergency rooms are shutting down because of the government's policies about not funding them, then they say to you, no, it's shutting down because it's glutted with immigrants. And what we really need to do is to pass a law so that immigrants can't go into emergency rooms. I mean, this is what was said to me more than once in California. And so the issue of scapegoating and how to really sort of fight that, and that's an issue for our community as well, I think it's a very difficult question when people don't want to understand what's against their own interests. They want to just blame it on other people.
Part of that is the way, there was an interesting analysis, I don't know if I referred to him earlier, Nicholas Kristof, my fellow Oregonian, who talked about how the left has tended to condescend to and speak in a way that's ineffective in building the alliances with people in the red states. And there's this sort of like elitism, condescension, perceived and probably real, that works against our. So as part of it is how we talk, how we talk to people.
We also have to start looking for commonalities. I mean, this is what I meant when I started, and I said I'm okay that this country is 60% in favor of civil unions and domestic partnership, because I remember it was a nanosecond ago that they didn't favor that. So I'm okay with that. That doesn't mean I stop fighting for gay marriage, but it means I say, okay, you're 60% in favor of civil unions. Now, where else can we agree? Where else can we agree? And I want to start building some common language, some common vision that doesn't, where everybody's most, you know, kind of perfect position isn't the prerequisite for agreement. Some broad principles are fine with me. We do not have to agree on every single one of them. And I mean, I think we are at, I mean, I really feel as if people, it's going to be a challenge, because, you know, the women's movement may have to recognize that there are people who identify as feminists who don't have the same definition for when they support abortion. People are going to have to just take a deep breath and just say, in order for us to win, and we have to start talking about winning, because the planet will be destroyed, democracy will be destroyed, and one brand or another of fundamentalism will triumph unless we put forward a vision that's radically different, that's radically whole, but that is, you know, I don't know, maybe it's simple, maybe it's just economic justice, human rights, and environmental sanity.
2 minutes left. Unfortunately, I don't know where the time goes. So a minute each for last thoughts. Anything you want to message to the viewers?
Well, I want to talk about this sort of false dichotomy, the false dichotomies between the red and the blue. If you looked at one of the maps that was in the LA Times, the most interesting map to me was population dispersion. And if you looked at where the population is dispersed, there's big chunks of blue right down the middle of the country, which is characterized as being completely red. And there's big swatches of rural America and rural people who are actually considered to be blue people. And I found that to be sort of reassuring, but also pointed up the folly of this sort of false dichotomy that we live with so often.
I would say that our democracy is alive and well, and as long as our democracy is alive and well, we can win. And so we just have to get busy.
I don't think that you would think the American people were more frightened of gay marriage than of terrorism. The way that this whole thing has been spun, kind of, and I don't think that. And furthermore, I think that there is a new movement being born, and those of us who were on the phone banks with all these young people who had never been engaged, it's a new democracy movement or something. It kind of came out around voting and electoral engagement. Who knew? Go figure. But we're at the beginning of something, and people need to just grab on with it, take the ride, be generous and loving to your neighbors, because they may not have the same politics as you would like them to, and just go for it, and we'll take back the country.
Well, there you have it. Of course, you're going to have your own opinion about all of this, and we're really glad that you were with us. Thank you, Curt. Thank you, Phill. Thank you, Torie. I always love and appreciate having you on the show, and this is going to be an interesting next couple of years, but we're going to have a lot of discussion and debate about it, so we might as well get used to it.